tonight. As Americans affected by Hurricanes Harvey and Irma pick up the pieces, liberals are already playing the blame game. According to them, it's Republicans' fault for not spending more money fighting climate change. It's ironic because Democrats claim to be the party of science, but where is the scientific evidence that climate change caused or significantly worsened these hurricanes? With me now, from the Institute on Science for Global Policy, risk expert Sweta Chakraborty. Sweta, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Liz.
All right, I want to talk about this just from a scientific perspective because there's been a lot of politicalization of these hurricanes lately, up to and including the Hurricane Relief Telethon, where Stevie Wonder came out and said, you know, let's love everyone, let's put politics aside, but anybody who doesn't believe in climate change is ignorant and unintelligent, which was ironic given what he had just said. But from a scientific perspective, do we have scientific proof that global warming or climate change worsened these hurricanes?
Thank you so much, Liz, for asking this question that I think really needs to be clarified. There's so many prevailing misconceptions out there, and I'm here to really set the record straight. So let's start with science being apolitical. Science is inherently neutral, and when you approach science, you come at it maybe with your own perspectives and your own biases, but the ultimate point of the scientific method is to reduce any of those biases. And so if you uphold the scientific method as a credible scientist, what you end up with is a result that will get as close to a causal conclusion as possible. Any scientist that tells you with 100% certainty that there's a causal relationship between climate change and man-made climate change and any of these extreme events we're seeing, for example, hurricanes, that is not credible. That is not a credible scientist. So it's important to understand that this method needs to be applied and upheld. And in doing so, we have come as close to that understanding and that result as we possibly can as a scientific community. What we do know, in the same way scientists prescribe to the scientific method, it's the same as doctors prescribing to the Hippocratic Oath. The ultimate point is to repeat the results, try and test it, and ensure no matter who is doing this research, where they're doing it, it's the same conclusions.
Right.
That has been done. That has been done, and we have now a wealth of evidence, an incredible number of scientists agreeing with this conclusion that climate change is man-made. That is as close to causation as we can get.
Right,
Any closer
right.
than that, it would be a prescription drug treating a disease.
That's not exactly my question, though. I mean, I'm not as interested in how many, if there's a consensus of scientists. It doesn't matter what a bunch of people think. Right is right and wrong is wrong. Science doesn't sway based off of popularity, I suppose. But that's what I'm asking. What is the scientific evidence? What evidence are liberals using when they say, listen, climate change has worsened this? Because I've done the same thing. I've looked at, the history of hurricanes. I've looked at the causes, and it doesn't seem to me that these hurricanes are anything more than natural variation. I'm looking for proof for the other side.
Absolutely, and you can see a wealth of data and a wealth of studies and proof. If there's skepticalscience.com is an excellent resource for looking at the exact studies that have proven this. But really, it's not that the liberals are using the science. Anyone who upholds the scientific method can point to the robustness of these studies.
Well, can you point to one for us? Our viewers are interested. Point to something. I mean, what are we talking about that has worsened these hurricanes? What scientific phenomenon caused by man that we could have prevented if we had changed our behavior? What has actually made these hurricanes worse than they would have been without us?
Absolutely. So please allow me to answer that.
Sure.
When we are putting additional carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, that's resulting in an increased warming, global warming. That's resulting in warmer ocean temperatures, faster melting of the glaciers and the Antarctic ice sheets. What that then results in is an expanding ocean. Simple physics and thermodynamics is what we're talking about here. When you have increasing ocean temperatures, you have warming water that then evaporates. Increased water vapor in the air is being held there in more capacity than prior to carbon dioxide emissions by humans into the atmosphere. That is then coming down as additional rain that we wouldn't have had otherwise had it not been for that warming. And so that additional rain, coupled with the rising sea levels, and for Florida, you have a seabed that's porous limestone. It's like Swiss cheese. And so to have that rising sea level on top of the intensity, the thermodynamics of a hurricane picking up its energy, getting its fuel from the ocean, warmer ocean temperatures, coupled with making landfall. And we heard Irma, for example, went up to Category 5, made landfall, and that intensity came from that thermodynamics of fueling energy
No,
from
I
the
get what
ocean
you're saying. I
temperatures.
get what you're saying. It actually makes sense. It actually makes sense that the warmer ocean temperatures would cause the greater intensity. But when we're looking at the empirical data that you mentioned earlier when you were talking about the scientific method, I mean, the increase in carbon dioxide, if you look at a graph, and this is by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, they're not exactly, I mean, that's a government agency. Their data is used for all sorts of climate change research and funding reasons. If you look at the graph, in the last 150 years, the train of hurricanes that we have seen in our nation, that did not increase in any significant way at the time that carbon dioxide emissions came into our life. The Industrial Revolution didn't increase that graph at all, so I'm not sure that that's empirically proven, what you're saying about the warm waters.
I hear what you're saying, Liz, and I think the keywords you just used were in our nation. If you look globally and worldwide, we have increasing tropical cyclones, we have increasing typhoons. These are the same as hurricanes. The changing in wording is just based on whether they're landing in the ocean over water or on land, but it's still a hurricane. So we have seen increased and accelerated extreme weather events that can be attributed to this global warming that
wait a second.
exists
Let me
globally.
go on that point for just a second. How do you know that they're increased hurricanes? How do you know that it's not just our increased capacity to detect these hurricanes? Because 150 years ago, our capacity to know whether these storms were out of the ocean was significantly inferior to what it was today. I need to see proof, not just conjecture here, that we actually have increased activity. And I don't see that that's proof when there's just as easy of an explanation saying, well, we just didn't see them back then, and we see them now.
Sure, well, we can measure, and we have records of measurement that are getting more precise and that are getting incredibly, with the supercomputers, we're able to detect it, and we're able to model what was then, what was current, what the future could be. And I know the question is, to what is the number attributable to man-made climate change? How much can we attribute exactly? And if we can show through these models and through this incredible measurement tools that we are increasingly developing, researchers in Stanford University is a good example of this attribution science, cutting edge science that can potentially, and not too far in the future, put a real number on how
we don't have that number now.
These phenomena
That's what I'm saying, we don't have that number. The only thing I've been asking for scientific evidence, the only thing that you've said is the increase in carbon dioxide, and that's been as widely debunked by scientists, by climatologists, as it has been offered to us by climate change activists. I don't see where there is actual scientific proof. All I see is conflicting political opinions that are using pseudoscience as their backing.
Yes, and that's the danger in it, because their credible scientists do have that proof, and they're putting it forward. The issue is you have these bombastic statements that are being made from, let's say, activist scientists, or however you refer to that group, and that is doing a massive disservice to the real risk, the reality of the risk. Because if we don't do anything about these risks, and I'm a risk expert, this is what I do. I talk about actual risk and how individuals, businesses, society at large, globally, we need to address and adapt to these risks. Attenuating it, which means saying that it's not a big deal, which is what the other side is doing and equally irresponsible in how they are managing it, that is resulting in people potentially being massively underprepared. So that is equally a risk. Over-amping a lot of these risks are just as bad as under-amping them. So it is critical to understand this real risk. And we are getting closer to getting those exact numbers, but until then, we have more than enough evidence.
But until then, we don't have numbers. Until then, we don't have numbers, and what people are relying on is sensationalism. It is irresponsible for people on the left, including Al Gore, including former President Obama, including many, many elected officials, to claim that climate change is causing these storms when truly we don't have any scientific evidence of that. It is a scientific theory.
With you more on that.
No, it is a scientific theory. There are no numbers that back it. It's irresponsible to make a claim that will further a political agenda when you're exploiting people who are hurt by natural disasters. Sweta, I do appreciate you coming on the show and having this conversation. Thank you so much for being here. All right, guys, you have 1 minute to tweet.